first start with just tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, what your career is, and what you're. Then we'll dive into a deeper dive on this on betting.
For sure. So currently, I am doing all kinds of things. Specifically, as it pertains to sports betting, I am a writer for Pine Sports. I write a blog there about 3 times a week, and it's about the major sports events that are going on in the world. So right now, I've largely been focused on the NFL because of the playoffs. But at some point, we'll dive a little bit more deeply into the NBA, the NHL. March Madness is certainly going to be a big thing in terms of my line of work. And basically, it's an opportunity to walk through certain bets that I like. Whether we're putting those together through AI research or any kind of analytical modeling, things like that. It's been fantastic. Certainly love what I do as far as the work that I do with Pine Sports. But then also I do things on a more purely analytical forum in terms of like FanDuel Sports Network West, where I'm talking about the Kings and the Clippers and the Angels in terms of using analytical models and advanced data to explain why a player is performing well or why a team is performing well, and tell stories through that. And it's something where it's not just, okay, this particular data point says that they're going to perform well. It's also a matter of what makes this so good, telling a story with that kind of stuff. And so do that. And then I'm also a lecturer at Cal Lutheran where I teach sports analytics and sports management and all kinds of good stuff.
What do you think? Like, what first got you? Go back in your career. Like, what first got you focused in on analytics and understanding the importance of the numbers, and particularly how it leads to telling a better story when you understand the numbers, right?
For sure. It all started, I think, from a really early age where I always loved math. I always loved numbers, but I also really enjoyed communication. And even though these skills were always present in everything that I did from grade school all the way up through college, there was always a question of, okay, how do I put all of this together? Because, you take your SAT, for instance, it's like it's math and it's verbal, and they are very separate things. And I'm thinking, well, not necessarily. There are probably ways to communicate math and numbers. I just couldn't quite figure out how to do that. And so one day, undergrad at SMU, I took Professor Tom Fomby's econometrics class, and he talked about the book Moneyball and how you can use advanced data to become a better baseball team. And so I read the book, and it was incredible finding competitive advantages using tools that I was already learning more about and I was already interested in. And so I thought, this is fantastic. This is really awe-inspiring. Now, how in the heck do I turn this into a career? Well, I got my master's in predictive analytics and started to incorporate advanced data into my storytelling when I was a local reporter. And then suddenly sports betting offered up some real ideas in terms of applying analytical techniques into what makes the best bet. And it made sense to me because analytics really is a truth seeking tool. It's not necessarily a betting tool. And the way that I approach sports betting is we want to figure out the truth. And we're not necessarily going to come up with answers, but we're going to come closer to answering said questions than if we were to just go on instinct or momentum or who's the most clutch, these kind of ambiguous terms that don't mean a whole heck of a lot. And so I figured analytics is a way to getting closer to whatever the truth is. And also it's something where predictions are priced in betting. You're forced to put numbers on your opinions. It's not just that, okay, there's a 100% chance something's going to happen or a 0% chance that something's going to happen. Instead, there's a probability component to it. And I think the fact that sports analytics forces us to think probabilistically, it made sports betting a natural match for me. And I love what I do because of it.
Just talk a little bit about your understanding. Obviously, you got the analytics background, and then you kind of buried the lead with your intro. But you've done a number of years of on air in front of the camera work. How did that prepare you to be better storyteller around the sports betting? Because I have to imagine that there's like sports betting at the core is like the fan that's making that connection and why they decide to make a bet or don't make a bet and things like that, and you
Mhm.
helping tell that story. So just talk a little bit about your broadcasting mirrored with the analytics to tell the story.
For sure. So I think whenever you're giving a bet out or giving some advice, I think it's one thing just to say, hey, take the Seahawks -7 this weekend against the 49ers. Okay, well, that's not exactly memorable. And it is okay for a viewer or a reader to go, well, why should I listen to this? I think the 49ers, given their history, they'll cover the 7, if not win outright. And the way you become memorable is by telling a story. What is it about Sam Darnold with the Seahawks or all of the injuries that the 49ers are suffering through this season that makes me believe that it is okay to bet on Seattle -7? And by telling a story, you become a good bit more memorable, and it is much likelier that your audience is going to come back to you for additional analysis and insights. It's not just give a bet, it's also telling a story with that, because through those stories, we have a greater opportunity of finding the truth. And I think on a more general level, whenever we're talking about journalism, yeah, there can be places where opinion runs rampant. Like, you watch roundtable panels on cable news networks, or you listen to the radio and a bunch of co-hosts are bickering about whatever. These are opinions, these are analyses, and that's not necessarily what analytics is all about. Analytics, like I said, probabilities, ranges, uncertainties, they're not necessarily just hot takes. And so I look at what I do in analytics and say, okay, these tenets of trying to find the truth and think of things probabilistically, journalism is not that different. And what it forces us to do is understand a sport really well. If numbers don't make sense in terms of the application, well, then we need to come in and say, hey, what's going on here? Because I learned this in the past. And then either you say that conventional wisdom is wrong, or you incorporate that conventional wisdom into your advanced data, your models, whatever the case may be. And it can kind of go hand in hand whenever you're shaping your analyses by looking at the numbers, looking at the data, seeing if it challenges conventional wisdom or enhances, complements conventional wisdom. And I think as we have those conversations and do those investigations, all those tenets that we had in journalism growing up, they're being utilized in a whole new way.
So I'm curious from like your point of view and thinking about a fan's perspective of gambling. Like we've had gambling forever, right?
Mhm.
But it's only been in the last 5 years or so that it's been legalized nationally, or mostly nationally, right? There's a few
Mhm.
outlier states, obviously. But how have you seen what positive changes have you seen in the way that players, I've just learned from DraftKings,
Mhm.
players engaged with the sports betting since it's become legal?
Well, I think anytime you have skin in the game, you're going to care more. And while we may all have rooting interests, I think every sport, they have several athletes and several teams that otherwise we may not be paying attention to. If you are a Dallas Cowboys fan, maybe you're not paying as much attention to the LA Chargers or the Minnesota Vikings as you otherwise would, but you watch what those athletes do, watch what those teams do, and you grow a real appreciation for how they win games or how they score a bunch of points. And I think that to me is really, really exciting that suddenly you care about stuff that you otherwise wouldn't. Now, it's not required to bet to care more. You can perhaps find some other gateway into these certain sports and care about teams and athletes that maybe aren't in your purview. But it is just naturally human nature that when you bet on something, you tend to care a little bit more about it. And I think that appreciation for athletes and teams outside of your usual perspective, I think that is a positive change. I think it forces us to look at what is successful elsewhere, or maybe that success is just based on luck and nothing else. But at least we know that, and we can talk about that more intelligently than we otherwise could. Betting as a gateway to learning rules, strategy, situational football, situational basketball, whatever sport you're betting on, these things matter. And I think whatever gateway you need to learn more about a particular sport, I see that as a good thing.
Switch gears a little bit here on just like your obviously, maybe I'm wrong, but obviously now that we're legal,
Mhm.
with and we're out in the open, was much more transparency and fairness. That's helped the industry and that's helped players, right? Rather than
Mhm.
before when it was kind of dodgy. So it's more consistent and fair, and you know what you're getting into. Correct?
Absolutely. Yes. I think one thing that we have to keep in mind is that just because something is legal doesn't make it perfect. And that isn't just in sports betting, that's in all kinds of industries where, okay, yes, we want to legalize it, but that is going to lead to other problems. And we are willing to accept what those problems are for the greater good. And I think when it comes to sports betting, you don't want everything to happen behind closed doors. You don't want everything to happen in terms of like an offshore capacity because there's less motivation to be open and honest. And I think anytime you're putting your hard-earned money on a kind of bet, then you want to know that what you see is what you get. And I think this kind of boils into the concept of, say, like insider trading, which, for those who may not know, is just simply where someone knows something and they know how it's going to turn out, and they have an unfair information advantage because that intel is not public. And when it comes to sports, when intel is not public, then you have problems, right? You want to know that when you're betting on something that you know everything that you possibly can, just like with injury reports, you want to know what those injuries are and that they are honest and truthful. And there's not gamesmanship involved, but you want to know that everything is happening on the up and up. And so when you have situations like the other day, when an FBI probe led to 26 arrests in college and international basketball, some might look at that and say, well, this is a problem, right? Because clearly, sports betting is leading to all of this kind of crime and you shouldn't bet on sports because of it. Well, first off, sports betting is going to happen regardless. It's like prohibition, right? Like people are going to drink. Maybe they'll just do it behind closed doors. And that can lead to all kinds of problems because you don't know what you're drinking. But I think sports betting is kind of in that same field where, okay, yes, there are problems. And yes, this does, draw some concerns when it comes to regulation and things can always be improved. I completely agree with that. But at the same time, I also believe that when we see these arrests, when we see this news come out, it's also a sign that the industry is regulating itself well enough to be able to catch these folks. And I think one of the things that you notice whenever those who are doing anything illegal in terms of fixing and all of that, they don't do it very well. It's pretty easy for books and the casual fan to notice when something isn't on the up and up. And the fact that the industry catches these things relatively quickly and is able to punish the bad people, this to me, I think, is a sign that the industry is going in the right direction.
So, can you speak a little bit, kind of as an analytics nerd, which I think you're a self-declared analytics nerd,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah.
In this class, I'm going to have the president of InVenue, which is a local analytics
Mm-hmm.
company here in Dallas, talk about predictive analysis and things like that. And I've really enjoyed their integration in Apple TV's baseball, where they're like really,
Yeah.
going next pitch is going to be ball strike, hit, RBI, walk, whatever, right? Can you just speak a little bit about like that integration of that predictive analysis and why it's important to like benefiting and helping the broadcast, and then which obviously is going to lead to, I think, ideally more real time prop betting and things like that. Correct?
Mhm. It could. It absolutely could. Again, and this is something that we can certainly discuss in greater detail down the road when it comes to, where the limitations perhaps should be. But to me, I look at this and go, okay, well, when it comes to the innovation in data analytics because of sports betting, a lot of that came from fantasy football and fantasy sports, where you want to build the best team you possibly can. And technology made it a heck of a lot easier to play fantasy sports. Instead of just doing this on a chalkboard in someone's garage, you're able to do this online and play with folks you've never met before. When that happened, suddenly the fantasy, sports community wanted more robust data. And betting props are no different in that regard because, you think about it, we have an explosion of player level data. And it's kind of this cycle where you are engaged in some kind of an activity, whether it's fantasy sports or betting or whatever it is, and you want the best information possible. At least that's what, the good ones do. It's not just their gut and instinct. It's, okay, I want as much information or I want the best information that I possibly can get. And that's so that you get some kind of an edge, right? So you get better insights because of these games that you're playing. You want that edge. You want to improve the data. And then suddenly the sport or some sort of outside data collection company, they proceed to say, hey, we can make money off of this by having the best possible data, the best possible insights you can. So it becomes a cycle. Better data, better insights, wanting an edge, wanting to improve that data, lather, rinse, repeat. And that loop, I think, is one of the reasons why the innovation exists in the first place and why we have so many exciting things on frontiers in basketball and baseball and football, because it's natural evolution, natural innovation to want these things to get better and better over time.
It does seem like one question I always ask any speaker in any class, and like just generally, how do you build a fan, a new fan,
Mhm.
right? Because I think the sports industry in general fails on this. They're like, look, we're football, we're baseball, we're hockey. You love us because we're us, right?
Mhm.
And we forget about really like how do you take a fan from zero to becoming a fan of that sport, right?
Right.
Can you does the data is the analytics is the data telling you that there's more fans of baseball, NHL, whatever sport there is because they're gambling on it, or is it just part of the this is like a side, right? Are they in
Right.
it for the action, or are they in it to become a Dodgers fan?
I think they're more in it for the action than it is anything else. I'm not sure that betting markets are naturally attracting more fans. Now, sometimes they may be caring about things that aren't necessarily in their purview. For example, again, you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, but you've got a bet on the Las Vegas Raiders game in an AFC West matchup. Maybe you're paying attention to that, but you're already a football fan. Nothing changed as far as that's concerned. But what does happen is maybe your bandwidth tends to be invested a little bit more in that sport, but you're already there. Right. I don't necessarily think you're flipping the switch from those who weren't football fans into those who have become football fans. Because you think about it, when you're betting on things, it's not necessarily the most straightforward thing in the world, where if you don't know what a touchdown is or how football gets scored, well, first you have to know that, and then you can place bets, right? You have natural steps that you need to take before you're betting on games. And so I don't necessarily think it's growing the number of fans, but maybe the quality has gotten a little bit better in terms of fans understanding things in a much deeper way. Something else too that I think matters here is that sometimes fans can learn concepts accidentally, such as expected value and variance and regression and all those kinds of things. And so the quality may very well be going up in terms of, understanding analytics, but I don't necessarily think it's necessarily growing an audience because you think about it, if you weren't big on sports betting in the first place, that may not necessarily change here. If you weren't, more accurately, maybe you weren't into sports in the first place. Well, I don't know if sports betting is naturally going to change that. If you were a fan before, you're still going to be a fan now. Maybe you just care about slightly different things.
Curious to get your take on what are some unintended negative aspects of being so out with legalized gambling and sports betting and things like that. What are some of the true negatives that we're seeing, if any?
Well, sure. I think one small one is that you've got a ton of data and a ton of bets that you can place. And I think a lot of it can be really overwhelming. And when you're overwhelmed, what do? You try and find some resource that can help you answer, these kinds of questions. And I think a lot of resources out there, some are fantastic. Don't get me wrong. There are some really brilliant people who can teach you responsible betting and how to understand data and all that stuff. And that's fantastic. But there are a lot of folks who sort of are juxtaposed with these experts, and they can sound incredibly confident. But when there isn't that level of accountability that I think is required, that can lead into some serious problems. I mean, if you were to do just kind of a blind test and look at 5 to 10 pundits on television or listening to podcasts, and you hear them or you watch them, confidence isn't necessarily, this kind of obvious correlation with overall success. Some people can sound really, really, really convincing and really, really, really entertaining. But at the end of the day, if you're talking about, TV ratings, radio ratings, whatever the case may be, sometimes it's the entertainment aspect that is more important to keeping these shows online versus are you actually good at what you do? Are you actually good at expanding your bankroll, adding to it. And so I think when you have overconfidence fueled by small sample sizes and social media wins and things like that, I think that's something where it's a lot harder to discern who the actual experts are and what actual expertise looks like. And I think that is very much an unintended consequence where is the right information supposed to come from? Because it kind of gets, garbled together where it's hard to figure out, okay, this is someone who I can trust. This is someone who I can't trust.
So as we're recording this, yesterday there was a NCAA had a point shaving. I think it
Yes.
was like 16 different players or somewhere about that. Like, how should universities and colleges be like talking about the importance of the integrity of games and things like that with their student athletes? What can they be
Mhm.
doing better to educate them? I have to imagine there's so many like outside influences trying to, from a classmate to someone that's
Mhm.
actually shady in the sports betting space, trying to get them to to fix things up. Like, how should schools be handling this?
I don't necessarily think this is a school problem. I think this is more of a psychological thing that we need to bring out into the open. And I'll bring up another scandal and then kind of circle back on this. It was a few months ago when I believe a couple of Cleveland Guardians pitchers were suspended, if I'm not mistaken, when it came to fixing something in terms of, not pitching very well or, getting runners on base, whatever the case may be. And it was found they were going to, make a couple of bucks by doing so. And they felt like they could get away with it because they were able to shave a couple of miles per hour off of a fastball, or, maybe their location wasn't exactly quite right. And well, there are other games where their location isn't quite right. So how could you tell the difference? I think one of the things that you have to be careful of is that a lot of athletes can feel incredibly confident that they can get away with something because, okay, if they're playing at an elite level, then it doesn't take a whole lot for anyone to necessarily notice that something is wrong. And look, this is where data come in, right? Because if you normally throw 96 and then suddenly you're throwing 94, and you were so consistent with 96 and suddenly 94 comes out, well, then maybe you throw that enough times where somebody, gets a red flag or there's some sort of alert that pops up and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't quite right. Either he is injured or something else is afoot. And so that's where data can actually be useful when it comes to catching those who are not doing things on the up and up. And so, specifically when it comes to what colleges can do, I think first off, you have to be mindful of the fact that when it comes to human nature, some folks feel like they can get away with just about anything, that they are invincible. And so, reminding them that they are not, that it is very easy to get caught if you are not. Playing consistently. I think that's certainly an important message to take. But then also, too, I think that it is also in human nature where sometimes the thrill, the adrenaline that you get by not getting caught for a couple of bucks may be fun. So I think it's something where, just simple reminders of, look, you may have this sensation that you can get away with something, but the truth is, everyone is aware of what's going on. And even if your performance isn't noticeable, the conversations you have, the way bets are placed, that also matters a great deal. So, for example, if you've got an account at a sports book and let's say that you bet $20 on certain bets, and then suddenly you try and drop $10,000 on something really, really specific, well, the books are going to get alerted by such things. And as a student athlete, you don't know that. So the fact that a student athlete who may be a part of, some kind of fix, look, not everyone is going to behave morally, ethically, and it may come up in some random way, and then you're going to get caught for it. So reminders of the punishments that this can lead to expulsions and all of that stuff. That's something that I think those friendly reminders out there can be very useful.
It's interesting because I think we've been looking at this the long way. I think I have the wrong way, right? Like, I've been thinking about, well, players won't mess with it because they make so much money. Those two Indians players, I think, make a million, like 2.5 million a year, right?
Right.
What's a couple $1,000s to them? But I think where in that case it was like individual prop bets on like ball strike, I think is what it was.
That's right. That's right.
And I think it was the lifelong friends from, I think they were from Puerto Rico, that were like,
Hmm.
hey, you can help me out by, and the pressure from that has got to be you
Right.
know, they're not doing it. In this case, I don't think they did it to make money for themselves. They did it to make money for their boys back in, the Dominican,
Hmm.
right? Which is, I don't know how I mean, you have to really, really talk about that and educate that. I don't know how you get away with fixing that. But
You think of all the various permutations and all the various possibilities when it comes to, okay, why would you do something like this? Maybe you're not doing it for the money. Fine. Although, some people are naturally greedy. And so you make, $2.5 million. What's better than $2.5 million? $2.6 million. That's what's better. So, yeah, maybe this is sort of a test case where you go, all right, well, I'll get a couple grand here, but maybe, when the stakes are raised, I can do more, whatever the case may be. So sometimes that addictive behavior can be a problem. But I think also, too, one thing that universities, in addition to studying this stuff, one thing that they can do is go over the various scenarios for why a student athlete would engage in this bad behavior and then remind them why it's a bad idea.
yeah, I'd love to get your take on like the state of the media now, because you
Mhm.
can't flip on a game. You can't even flip on like the local CBS here in town, right? And see them
Yeah.
talking about like the spread and the and
Mhm.
and the points and the over under and things like that. Like, do you think like just the mainstreaming from the media talking about this is helping or hurting the industry?
Well, I think it depends on how it's done. It's hard for me to say, generally speaking, if we're helping or harming, because I think sometimes you can find case studies and specific examples where someone is going about it the right way versus something, being absolutely wrong and atrocious. I can tell you from my experience, whenever I've been on TV shows that are sports betting shows or radio sports betting shows, one of the things that I always try and do is promote responsible betting. And I do that by doling out information. You do with that information what you will. Maybe you listen to my takes and analyses and go, actually, I think it's being misinterpreted and I'm going to go the other direction. Go for it. I'm not hurt by that at all. As long as you are there listening to me and taking in what I have to say, then that is perfectly fine. And I think at the end of the day, that's what the executives should want, as well as having good ratings. One example of this might be like same game parlays, where you're dealing with one game and you've got a number of legs within that game, and they all need to hit for you to cash your bet. And I think this is, to me, a fantastic example of when someone is going about it the right way versus, otherwise. So with same game parlays, like the odds of them hitting, no matter how you put them together, are relatively small. They aren't necessarily the best things in terms of expanding your bankroll. And so whenever I was asked to put together a same game parlay, I would do it because certainly there are some same game parlays that I think, you look at the probability and say, okay, well, given the payout, there's a 10% chance it hits. And I do my own number crunching and go, well, actually, I think it's more like 20%. And you'd be a fool not to bet on this same game parlay. So that certainly is a possibility. And to me, what matters is that you are extra responsible and you're not just putting, if it's six legs, that they're not just six random legs that have nothing to do with each other. There needs to be some kind of a correlation saying, okay, the only way for Sam Darnold to go over his passing prop is for the defense to actually have X number of pressures or for so and so to have a sack because then the game is close. So he's going to have to pass a little bit more. And so when you're able to sort of walk someone through how a game is going to play out, to me, that's way more responsible than just simply saying, okay, well, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. The other thing's going to happen. You're going to make $30 million off of it. Like, no, that to me is irresponsible. And certainly there are some outlets that do those kinds of things, and that's a problem. But I think if you are promoting a same game parlay because a book is paying for it, there's a way to do it responsibly. And if you can do it that way, to me, that's how you kind of remedy this issue of the media being promotional versus educational.
What responsibility? I got a couple more questions for you here, Edward. Ed,
Yeah.
what responsibility do you think? It's interesting for me to see, and I'm in Texas, so I don't see a lot of ads, right, necessarily on
Mhm.
sports betting, but like it does definitely seems like here's everything that's cool and sexy about sports gambling, sports betting, and then at the very end, oh, and if you have a problem, call this number. Like, what
Yes.
responsibility do the books and do the FanDuels and DraftKings of the world have to better educating consumers, their consumers, about the downfall of the addiction side of it?
I think there is a responsibility to it. And you can do that through captions on commercials. You can do that through reads. I mean, and I think a lot of this stuff is done already. At the same time, I think one thing that the media can do is make sure that the differentiations exist. And so you say, okay, this window of time is dedicated to a sports betting conversation, whereas this window of time is not dedicated to that. And I know that's still going to lead to problems because, some folks have addictive personalities and they're not necessarily going to change the channel or mute real quickly or turn the radio off, whatever it is. So sometimes you're still going to have issues. But I think one way to kind of solve this issue is by making sure that you differentiate a betting conversation versus a non-betting conversation, that it's not some seamless thing where you've got the exact same experts who are talking about a football game telling you how to bet on whatever. Because one key, really, really important concept that I hope folks take away from this, if nothing else, is that just because you were a professional athlete doesn't mean you know how to make money on that particular sport. You may be asked, what are your takes on this new up and coming quarterback or this new up and coming point guard? And you're going to have some insights that no one else has, and that's really valuable. But those insights are not always, and typically they aren't translatable when it comes to winning bets. It is an entirely different exercise altogether. And I think this is something that the media can help out with when it comes to not necessarily having the exact same people wax poetic on the sport they used to play, then proceed to tell us how to bet on things. It's not necessarily their money. And then also that's a quick sidebar too. If you are promoting bets, make sure that you are putting your money where your mouth is. I make sure that whenever I recommend a bet, that even, chump change is actually going into that, because I don't necessarily feel comfortable advising someone to do something and I'm not doing it myself, right? So that's
Yep.
something else
Yep.
too. But I think also more importantly, like, keep experts on what they know. If they do know something about making money off betting, then that's fantastic. But I think a lot of them don't. And I think those differentiations, subtle and not so subtle, matter a great deal for responsible betting.
What trends, what technology, analytics, market growth, and things like that, and maybe add to this too, like what future job opportunities that are going to be in the industry that are going to either get enhanced or developed that we haven't seen before, like in the next
Mhm.
3, 5, 10 years, whatever it is. Like what are you keeping an eye on
For
as
sure.
trends? Yeah.
Right now, I think artificial intelligence is going to be really interesting when it comes to what role it plays, because AI models are getting a heck of a lot smarter. At the same time, sports books are also incredibly sharp. If I were advising a first-time bettor how to make money or how to appreciate sports or whatever it is, I would say don't necessarily start with the NFL because those lines are sharp. Like, chances are the reason why a team covers or doesn't cover is based on sheer luck, not necessarily because you were able to interpret something better than others. Now, there are exceptions to that, obviously, but I would say start with a sport where there are betting lines, but no one quite knows how to interpret these kinds of things. And so, like the WNBA, for instance, is not as popular as the NFL. Maybe start there, know that sport, inside and out, and maybe you're likelier to make some real money that way because not enough people are going in and setting the line and moving the line to making sure that it is something where the winners and losers are based on luck essentially. So that to me is important. But at the same time, because AI and new technologies are out there and the advice I'm doling out isn't necessarily original, I think it's something where that's going to be a lot harder to come by, right? Um, what because AI is going to be able to capture information on all kinds of obscure sports. And eventually everyone's going to use these tools, and then finding an edge is going to be that much more difficult. And so AI has this thing where, yeah, we might be smarter betters, but the books are going to get smarter as well. And it goes back to that loop that we were talking about when it comes to, here's the evolution, here's the demand, thus the technology gets better. So that's one important thing. The other thing when it comes to jobs, other states are going to go online in all likelihood. Texas, California. At some point, I do feel like this should be a 50-state thing. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think eventually other states are going to go online, and some folks have to figure out how to do it properly and responsibly. So that's going to be something that matters a great deal here. Also, too, when you look at DraftKings and FanDuel, the main offices are based in the Northeast. Maybe another book needs to come in and challenge that geographically. And maybe that's how other states get online, more comfortably, or, it's another opportunity for other jobs to be available in the sports betting industry. So I think a lot of that is what's happening. So it's not necessarily anything new. It's just enhancements that already exist.
Yeah. I know there's a certain ownership group that's very invested in getting legalized betting in Texas
Mhm.
before they decide to move that team to Las Vegas. Um,
Interesting. I
um,
wonder what you're talking about there.
that's my inside baseball theory anyway on our Dallas Mavericks.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, well, is there anything we missed that we didn't get a chance to touch on?
I think when it comes to sports betting in general, I think it can be a fantastic teaching tool, if nothing else. Like, even if you are uncomfortable betting, I completely understand that, and I'm not going to try and convince you otherwise. But I think being aware of it is really, really useful because, again, sports betting and sports analytics forces us to understand sports when it comes to what actually matters. Because I think for a long time when it came to sports coverage, we were talking about, oh, they have all the momentum. Well, I'm not sure momentum actually exists. That's a hot take of mine, but I'm not exactly sure momentum exists in sports, despite, even athletes, saying, oh, it absolutely exists. Well, psychologically, we can fool ourselves into this, but the data do not back that up. So don't live bet something just because they've scored on the last two drives. Just as easily, you can get a turnover and then you've lost the momentum and your money at the same time. But I think what sports betting and sports analytics can force us to do is understand things in a much better way. And ultimately, by having those kinds of insights, we can appreciate sports in a much more refined way. Because I do believe that athletes, leagues, coaches, they want fans to be smarter. And how you get there can happen in a variety of ways. And sports betting is just another one of them.
All right, awesome. That's a great way to finish up here. I really appreciate your time and your insight, and hopefully, I know our students will find this super informational.
I really
Appreciate
appreciate
it.
that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right.